The scream that shattered my Tuesday morning wasn't just any cry. It was the sound of my 7-year-old son Tyler in agony, his small hand pressed against the scalding stovetop by the woman who was supposed to protect him. What I discovered next would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my family, and force Oregon's Attorney General, my own father, to choose between his wife and justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The smell hit me first. Not the usual aroma of Victoria's elaborate breakfast preparations, but something sharper, more acrid. Burning skin. I dropped my coffee mug on the kitchen counter of my father's Hillcrest home, the ceramic shattering against granite as Tyler's piercing wail echoed through the hallways. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, racing toward the sound that every parent knows instinctively, the cry that means real danger, real pain. I found them in the main kitchen, Victoria standing frozen with her perfectly manicured hand still gripping Tyler's wrist, his palm flat against the glowing red coil of the electric stovetop. The sizzling sound made my stomach lurch. 3 seconds felt like 3 hours before I lunged forward, yanking my son away from her grip and cradling his trembling body against my chest. "What happened?" I gasped, examining Tyler's hand. The burn was already forming angry red welts across his palm, the pattern of the burner element clearly visible on his tender skin. His tears soaked through my blouse as he sobbed against my shoulder, small fingers clutching at my sleeve like I might disappear. Victoria smoothed her blonde hair and adjusted her silk robe with the same practiced calm she used when hosting dinner parties for my father's political colleagues. "He was being defiant again, Lily. I told him not to touch the stove while I was cooking, but he reached for the bacon anyway. Sometimes children need to learn consequences the hard way." Something cold settled in my chest. Tyler had always been cautious around hot surfaces, almost to a fault. Just last week he'd refused to help me with cookies because he was afraid of the warm oven door. Tyler doesn't reach for things on the stove. He's terrified of getting burned. "Well, apparently not terrified enough," Victoria replied, turning back to flip the bacon as if nothing had happened. "Children lie to avoid trouble, you know. You coddle him too much." I stared at her back, at the casual way she continued cooking while my son whimpered in pain. Tyler pulled back from my embrace, his tear-streaked face looking up at me with confusion and hurt. "Mommy?" She grabbed my hand and pushed it down. I tried to pull away, but she held it there. It hurt so bad. Victoria's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, but she didn't turn around. "He's being dramatic." Children always exaggerate when they get in trouble. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the morning sunlight streaming through the bay windows too bright, too cheerful for what had just occurred. I lifted Tyler into my arms, his burned hand carefully positioned away from both our bodies. "We're going to the hospital," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's completely unnecessary," Victoria said, finally turning to face us. Her green eyes held no warmth, no concern for the injured child in my arms. "It's barely a first-degree burn. Some cold water and aloe will be fine." "You're being hysterical." I was already moving toward the door, grabbing my purse and Tyler's jacket from the hooks near the garage entrance. "My son is injured. We're getting medical attention." "Your father won't appreciate you making a scene over nothing, Lily. He has enough stress with the Morrison investigation." Victoria's voice carried a subtle threat, the kind she'd perfected over the 3 years since marrying my father. "You know how these things can be misinterpreted." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. David Hayes, Oregon's Attorney General, was indeed in the middle of prosecuting a high-profile child abuse case that had dominated local headlines for months. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the thought aside. Tyler's well-being came first, always. "Let them misinterpret," I said, and walked out. The drive to Cedar Ridge Children's Hospital felt endless despite being only 12 minutes away. Tyler had stopped crying but remained unnaturally quiet, cradling his injured hand against his chest. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, this beautiful boy with my dark hair and my father's determined chin, trying to process what I'd witnessed. Victoria's explanation didn't make sense. Tyler was the most cautious 7-year-old I knew, the kind of child who asked permission before touching anything that might be fragile or dangerous. He'd been staying at my father's house for the past 2 weeks while I dealt with a family emergency. My grandmother's sudden illness had required me to make several trips to Bend, and Victoria had volunteered to watch Tyler when my usual childcare arrangements fell through. At the hospital, Dr. Helen Morrison examined Tyler's hand with gentle precision. She was a petite woman with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of pediatrician who spoke directly to children rather than over their heads. "Can you tell me what happened, Tyler?" she asked, carefully cleaning the burn with cool saline solution. Tyler looked at me, then back at the doctor. Victoria grabbed my hand and put it on the hot stove. I told her it hurt, but she kept pushing it down. Dr. Morrison's movement stilled for just a moment. "Were you trying to touch the stove yourself?" "No," Tyler said firmly. "I was sitting at the table eating my cereal." She called me over and then grabbed my hand and put it on the red circle. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't an accident or even a harsh lesson about stove safety. This was deliberate. Dr. Morrison continued her examination without comment, but I caught the subtle shift in her demeanor. She photographed the burn from multiple angles, measured it, and documented the clear pattern of the burner element on Tyler's palm. The burn was perfectly centered, too uniform to have been caused by an accidental brush against the surface. "The burn will heal, but it's going to be painful for several days," she explained to Tyler. "We'll give you some special cream and bandages to help it feel better." She turned to me. "I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment." We stepped into the hallway, leaving Tyler with a nurse who was showing him pictures in a children's book. Dr. Morrison closed the door carefully behind us. "Mrs. Brennan, I have to ask, is there any chance this wasn't accidental?" The question hung between us like a live wire. "I think my stepmother deliberately burned him," I said quietly. "His story hasn't changed, and it doesn't match hers. Tyler doesn't lie about things like this. The burn pattern is consistent with sustained contact against a heating element," Dr. Morrison said carefully. "In my experience, accidental burns typically show signs of movement, scraping, irregular patterns from pulling away quickly. This burn suggests the hand was held in place." My throat tightened. What do I do? "I'm required by law to file a report with Child Protective Services," she said gently. "This type of injury, combined with the child's account, constitutes suspected abuse. I recommend you document everything. Take photos of the burn as it heals, write down exactly what Tyler told you, and keep records of any interactions with your stepmother." The word abuse hit like a physical blow. I'd been thinking of it as a terrible incident, a moment of poor judgment or cruel discipline. But hearing it labeled properly forced me to confront the reality. Someone had intentionally caused my child severe pain. "Will Tyler be safe?" I asked. "That's not for me to determine, but I strongly recommend limiting his exposure to the person who caused this injury until the investigation is complete." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead to the complications this would create. Victoria lived with my father. My father, who prosecuted child abusers for a living, was married to someone who had just deliberately harmed his grandson. The political implications alone could destroy his career, but more importantly, Tyler's safety had to come first. Back in the examination room, Tyler was showing the nurse how he could wiggle his fingers, despite the bandages. His resilience amazed me, but I could see the confusion in his eyes when he looked at me. He didn't understand why someone who was supposed to care for him had hurt him intentionally. "Are we going back to Grandpa David's house?" he asked as we prepared to leave. "Not right now, buddy. We're going to stay at our place for a while." "Because of my hand?" I knelt down to his level, choosing my words carefully. "Because I need to make sure you're safe and happy. What happened to you this morning was not okay, and it's not your fault." Tyler nodded solemnly. Victoria was really angry. She said I was just like you, too stubborn and too nosy for my own good. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Victoria's animosity toward Tyler wasn't just about his behavior. It was about me. He reminded her of someone she clearly resented, and in her mind, that justified hurting him. We drove home to my small apartment near downtown Portland, Tyler's injured hand resting on a pillow in his lap. I called my workplace to explain I'd be taking family leave, then settled Tyler on the couch with his favorite blanket and a stack of books. While he napped, I sat at my kitchen table and began writing down everything I could remember about the morning's events. The details felt important somehow, like evidence in a case I didn't yet understand I was building. The way Victoria had gripped Tyler's wrist. Her calm demeanor afterward. The specific words she'd used. The threat about my father's stress levels and how things could be, quote, misinterpreted. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Victoria said Tyler had a small accident this morning. Hope he's feeling better. We'll call later. I stared at the message for a long time. A small accident. Victoria had already begun spinning the narrative, minimizing what had happened. I wondered what other details of the story she'd changed in her version to my father. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I took careful photographs of Tyler's bandaged hand from multiple angles, then sat down to research burn patterns and child abuse documentation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
If Dr. Morrison was filing a CPS report, I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The afternoon stretched on quietly. Tyler woke from his nap complaining that his hand hurt, so I gave him the prescribed pain medication and distracted him with a puzzle. He seemed to be processing what had happened in the way children do, accepting the facts without fully understanding the implications. "Mommy," he said while we worked on the puzzle together, "why did Victoria hurt me?" The question I'd been dreading. "Some people don't know how to handle their feelings the right way," I said carefully. "When they get angry or frustrated, they might do things that hurt others. But that doesn't make it okay, and it's never the fault of the person who gets hurt. Was she angry at me? I think she was angry about other things, and she took those feelings out on you. That's not fair, and it's not something you caused." Tyler seemed to accept this explanation, returning his attention to the puzzle pieces. But I could see him thinking, processing, trying to make sense of an adult world that had suddenly become unpredictable and dangerous. My phone rang around 4 o'clock. My father's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my stomach tighten. I let it go to voicemail, not ready for that conversation yet. When I listened to the message later, his voice sounded tired and strained. "Lily, I just got home and Victoria told me what happened this morning. I understand you took Tyler to the hospital, which seems like an overreaction, but I suppose it's better to be safe. Give me a call when you get a chance. We should talk about this situation before it gets blown out of proportion." Blown out of proportion. As if my son's deliberate injury was a minor inconvenience that could be managed with the right spin. I saved the voicemail, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. That evening, while Tyler played quietly in his room, I called my best friend, Carmen Rodriguez. Carmen was a pediatric nurse at a different hospital, someone I'd known since college who had no connections to my father's political world. "Carmen, I need your advice about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I told her everything, the morning's events, Tyler's account, Dr. Morrison's assessment, Victoria's reaction. Carmen listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Lily," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is textbook abuse. The deliberate nature, the specific pattern of the burn, the child's consistent story, these aren't gray areas. This woman intentionally injured your son. But she's married to the Attorney General. She hosts charity fundraisers. People respect her. Abusers don't wear signs announcing their behavior," Carmen said firmly. "Some of the most dangerous people I've encountered in my work have been pillars of their communities. Status doesn't prevent someone from harming children. Sometimes it just makes it easier for them to hide it." After I hung up, I sat in my living room listening to Tyler's soft breathing from his bedroom. The apartment felt too quiet, too small for the enormity of what we were facing. Tomorrow, I would have to decide how to handle my father's calls, how to respond to Victoria's inevitable attempts to control the narrative, and how to protect Tyler from further harm. But tonight, my son was safe. His hand was properly treated and bandaged. He was sleeping peacefully in his own bed, away from the person who had hurt him. For now, that had to be enough. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Oregon's child protection laws, custody rights, and the procedures for reporting suspected abuse. If Victoria thought she could hurt my child and face no consequences, she was about to learn how wrong she could be. My father might be the Attorney General, but Tyler was my son, and I would move heaven and earth to protect him. The game was just beginning, and I intended to win. The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds when my phone began its relentless buzzing. 6 missed calls from my father, 4 from Victoria, and a text from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. Some accidents happen when mothers don't pay attention to their children. Perhaps Tyler needs more supervision. I screenshotted the message immediately, adding it to the growing digital file I'd started building. Tyler woke up feverish and cranky, his bandaged hand throbbing despite the medication. I helped him shower carefully, keeping his injured palm dry with a plastic bag, and noticed how he flinched when I accidentally brushed against his hand. The physical healing would take weeks, but I was beginning to understand that the emotional damage might take much longer. "Can we have pancakes?" he asked, settling into his chair at our small kitchen table. It was the first time he'd shown interest in food since yesterday, and I took it as a positive sign. While I mixed the batter, Tyler studied his bandaged hand with the intense curiosity of a child trying to understand something that didn't make sense. "Mommy, when I go back to Grandpa David's house, will Victoria still be there?" The question hung in the air between us. I hadn't told him we wouldn't be going back, hadn't explained that everything had changed in the span of a few terrible minutes yesterday morning. "We're gonna stay here for a while, buddy. Just you and me." "Because she hurt me?" His directness always caught me off guard. Children cut through adult euphemisms and political complications with startling clarity. "Yes, because she hurt you, and my job is to keep you safe." Tyler nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Will she hurt other kids?" The question struck me like a physical blow. I hadn't considered that Tyler might be worried about other children. In his mind, if Victoria had hurt him, she might hurt someone else. The innocence of his concern for others, even after being victimized himself, made my chest tight with both pride and fury. "I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen," I promised him, though I wasn't yet sure how. After breakfast, while Tyler colored at the table, I finally returned my father's calls. He answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the controlled frustration I remembered from my childhood when I disappointed him. "Lily, we need to discuss this situation before it spirals out of control. Victoria is extremely upset about your accusations." "My accusations?" I kept my voice level, aware that Tyler could hear every word. "Dad, Tyler has second-degree burns on his palm from being held against a hot stove. That's not an accusation. It's a documented injury. Children exaggerate when they're hurt or scared, you know that. Victoria said he reached for the bacon and burned himself, then created this elaborate story to avoid getting in trouble." I walked into my bedroom and closed the door, lowering my voice. "The burn pattern shows his hand was held in place against the heating element. Dr. Morrison confirmed it. This wasn't an accident, and Tyler's story hasn't changed." A long pause. "Helen Morrison is required to file reports for any suspicious injury, regardless of the actual circumstances. It's protocol, not a diagnosis of abuse. We can't let one doctor's overly cautious interpretation destroy our family." Our family. The phrase made me want to laugh bitterly. "Your wife deliberately burned your grandson, and you're worried about family unity?" "Lower your voice," my father said sharply. "I've built my career on protecting children and prosecuting actual abusers. Do you think I would allow someone who harms children to live in my house? Victoria has been nothing but patient with Tyler's difficult behavior." "Difficult behavior? He's 7 years old, Dad. What behavior justifies burning his hand?" "Nobody burned anybody," my father snapped. "A child had an accident, and you're turning it into some kind of conspiracy theory. Victoria loves Tyler like her own grandchild." The conversation was going nowhere. My father had already chosen his side, and it wasn't Tyler's. "I need to go." Tyler has a follow-up appointment this afternoon. Lily, if you continue down this path, there will be consequences. Victoria is considering filing a defamation claim against you for spreading false accusations. My political opponents would love nothing more than to create a scandal around my family. Think about what you're doing. The threat was clear. Back down, or face legal and political retaliation. I hung up without responding. Tyler's follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison went smoothly. The burn was healing properly, though it would leave a permanent scar. She photographed the injury again, documenting its progression, and asked Tyler gentle questions about how he was feeling. Is the lady who hurt you still around? Dr. Morrison asked. No, we're staying at our house now, Tyler replied. Mommy says I'm safe. Dr. Morrison caught my eye and nodded approvingly. After Tyler's examination, she pulled me aside again. I wanted you to know that CPS will likely contact you within the next few days. I filed my report, and they'll want to interview both you and Tyler. I've also documented everything thoroughly in case legal proceedings become necessary. Legal proceedings? Criminal charges for child abuse, or civil proceedings if custody becomes an issue. The documentation we have is very strong. Clear injury pattern, consistent victim testimony, medical evidence. If this goes to court, you'll have everything you need. That afternoon, I took Tyler to visit his favorite playground. He played cautiously, favoring his injured hand, but seemed to be regaining some of his natural enthusiasm. While he climbed on the jungle gym, I called Carmen for advice. How do I protect him from my own family? I asked, watching Tyler laugh as he went down the slide. The same way you'd protect him from any abuser, Carmen said firmly. You document everything, you limit contact with the perpetrator, and you trust the system to work. Your father being the Attorney General actually works in your favor legally. If charges are filed, he'll have to recuse himself from any involvement, which means an independent prosecutor will handle the case. What if CPS doesn't believe Tyler's story? Lily, you have medical documentation, photographic evidence, and a credible witness, your son. Plus, the doctor who examined him is a respected pediatrician with 20 years of experience. CPS investigators aren't easily fooled, especially when the evidence is this clear. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding your son's welfare." My hands trembled as I opened it. Ms. Brennan, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Detective Rachel Kim, with the Portland Police Bureau's Child Abuse Unit. I've been assigned to investigate the incident involving your son Tyler. I would like to schedule a time to speak with both you and Tyler in the next few days. Please call me at your earliest convenience to arrange an interview. I want to assure you that we take all reports of child abuse seriously and will conduct a thorough investigation. The reality hit me fully then. This was no longer a family dispute or a misunderstanding. This was a criminal investigation. Victoria would be questioned by police. Evidence would be analyzed. The truth would come out, regardless of my father's political position or Victoria's social standing. I called Detective Kim immediately, despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring, her voice professional but kind. Thank you for calling so quickly, Ms. Brennan. I know this must be a difficult time for your family. Detective Kim, I need to ask, how does this work when my father is the Attorney General? Is there a conflict of interest? Attorney General Hayes has already been notified of the investigation and has recused himself from any involvement. The case will be handled independently by our unit and the District Attorney's Office. Your father's position doesn't protect anyone from prosecution if charges are warranted. We scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday. Detective Kim explained that Tyler would be interviewed by a specially trained child forensic interviewer in a comfortable, non-threatening environment. Everything would be recorded for evidence. Ms. Brennan, I want you to know that children rarely lie about abuse, especially when their stories remain consistent over time and match the physical evidence. We'll be thorough, but based on what I've reviewed so far, this appears to be a strong case. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process how quickly everything had changed. 48 hours ago, I was a single mother grateful for my stepmother's help with childcare. Now I was the parent of an abuse victim, preparing to testify against a member of my own family. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Police investigations can be very stressful for children, traumatic even. Perhaps we should discuss alternative arrangements before this goes too far. This time, I forwarded the message directly to Detective Kim. Whoever was sending these threats had just provided law enforcement with evidence of witness intimidation. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared Tyler for his interview with CPS and the police. I'd explained to him that some nice people wanted to hear his story about what happened to his hand, and that telling the truth would help keep other children safe. "Will Victoria get in trouble?" he asked as I helped him into his jacket. "People who hurt children usually do get in trouble," I said carefully. "That's how we keep kids safe." Tyler thought about this. "Good. She shouldn't hurt anybody else." The interview facility was designed to feel like a comfortable living room rather than an official government building. Tyler met with Sarah Chen, a child forensic interviewer who specialized in talking with young victims. I watched from an observation room as Sarah gently encouraged Tyler to tell his story in his own words. Tyler's account remained remarkably consistent. He described sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal when Victoria called him over to the stove. He demonstrated how she grabbed his wrist and pressed his palm against the hot burner, how he tried to pull away but couldn't because she was stronger. He showed Sarah the exact position using a toy stove in the interview room. "Did you do something that made Victoria angry?" Sarah asked. "I don't think so," Tyler said thoughtfully. "I was just eating my cereal like always. But she seemed mad already when she woke up. She was banging the pans really loud and muttering about things." "What kind of things?" "Stuff about my mom. She said my mom was going to be sorry for something, and that some people needed to learn their place." This was new information. Tyler hadn't mentioned Victoria's comments about me before. Sarah explored this topic gently, and Tyler recalled more details about Victoria's mood that morning, her angry comments about our family, and her statement that I was too big for my britches. The pattern became clearer. Victoria's abuse of Tyler wasn't just about disciplining a child. It was about punishing me through my son. Tyler had become a proxy for her resentment toward me, a convenient target for anger she couldn't direct at an adult. After Tyler's interview, Detective Kim spoke with me privately. "Ms. Brennan, based on Tyler's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, I'll be recommending that the district attorney file charges against Victoria Hayes for second-degree assault and child abuse. The threats you've been receiving will be investigated separately as witness intimidation. What happens next? We'll obtain a warrant for Mrs. Hayes' arrest. Given the evidence, she'll likely be charged within the week. You should be prepared for this to become public knowledge, especially given your father's position." I thought about my father, about his political career and his reputation as a champion of child welfare. The irony was devastating. The man who prosecuted child abusers for a living had married one, and was now protecting her instead of his own grandson. "Detective Kim, what about my father? He's been defending Victoria and pressuring me to drop this. That's unfortunately common in family abuse cases. Sometimes family members have difficulty accepting that someone they trust could harm a child. However, if your father attempts to interfere with this investigation or intimidate witnesses, he could face charges himself." That afternoon, I picked Tyler up from his grandmother's house where he'd been staying during my interview with police. My ex-husband's mother, Elena Brennan, had been a godsend throughout this crisis, providing Tyler with stability and love while I navigated the legal system. "How did it go today?" Elena asked, her weathered hands gentle as she helped Tyler with his backpack. "Tyler did great. He told the truth, and the police believe him." Elena nodded approvingly. She'd been skeptical of Victoria from the beginning, noting how the woman seemed to compete with me for Tyler's attention rather than supporting our relationship. "That woman never sat right with me," Elena said quietly. "Too much concern with appearances, not enough with actual caring. I'm proud of you for protecting Tyler, even when it's difficult." That evening, Tyler and I had dinner at our kitchen table, and he seemed more relaxed than he'd been since the incident. His hand was healing well, and the stress of uncertainty was lifting now that adults were taking his story seriously. Mommy, will I have to tell my story again? Maybe, if we go to court. But you've done the hardest part already. You told the truth, and people believed you. Tyler nodded. The lady today was nice. She said I was very brave. You are brave, Tyler. Braver than most adults I know. My phone remained mercifully quiet that evening, no threatening texts or angry calls from my father. The calm felt ominous, like the quiet before a storm. Victoria and my father were undoubtedly strategizing, planning their response to the criminal investigation. I spent the evening researching Oregon's victim protection laws and documenting every interaction I'd had with Victoria and my father since the incident. If this case went to trial, I wanted to be prepared for every question, every attack on Tyler's credibility, every attempt to blame me for the situation. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Detective Kim called while Tyler was eating breakfast, her voice tense with urgency. Ms. Brennan, we need to move quickly. Victoria Hayes attempted to leave the state last night. She was stopped at Portland International Airport with a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. We're executing the arrest warrant immediately. My hands shook as I absorbed this information. Victoria had tried to flee the country rather than face the consequences of abusing Tyler. Her attempted escape was essentially an admission of guilt, proof that she knew exactly what she'd done. What does this mean for the case? It strengthens our position considerably. Flight risk demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The judge will likely deny bail, which means Mrs. Hayes will remain in custody until trial. After I hung up, I looked across the table at Tyler, who was carefully cutting his pancakes with his uninjured hand. He had no idea that his abuser was being arrested at that very moment, that justice was finally beginning to work in his favor. Tyler, how would you feel about visiting Grandma Elena for a few days? We might need to stay somewhere safe while some grown-up things get sorted out. Will Victoria be there? No, sweetheart. Victoria won't be able to hurt you anymore. Tyler considered this, then nodded. Can I bring my Legos? You can bring whatever you want. As I packed our bags, I thought about the journey we'd traveled in just 1 week. From a trusted family member to an abuser in custody. From a child's accident to a criminal case. From my father's disappointment to my own fierce determination to protect my son. Victoria's arrest would trigger a media firestorm. My father's political career would face scrutiny. Our family would be forever changed. But Tyler would be safe, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. The phone rang as I zipped up Tyler's suitcase. My father's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since this began, I answered. Lily. His voice was strained, aged. I just heard about Victoria's arrest. Good. Maybe now you'll listen to your grandson instead of protecting his abuser. A long pause. I need to see Tyler. To apologize. Dad, Tyler is safe and happy for the first time in a week. I'm not going to disrupt that so you can ease your conscience. I was wrong, he said quietly. I should have listened to you. I should have protected him. Yes, you should have. But you chose Victoria instead, and now she's in jail where she belongs. The conversation ended there. There would be time later for forgiveness, for rebuilding our relationship, for healing the damage Victoria had caused to our entire family. But first, Tyler needed to feel completely secure, and I needed to see this case through to its conclusion. As we drove to Elena's house, Tyler hummed quietly in the back seat, his injured hand resting comfortably in his lap. He was resilient in the way children often are, adapting to new circumstances with remarkable grace. The physical scar would remain, but I was determined that the emotional wounds would heal completely. Victoria Hayes was in custody, facing serious criminal charges. The truth had prevailed, despite my father's political influence and Victoria's social connections. Tyler's voice had been heard, believed, and acted upon. The hardest part was over. Now came the work of moving forward, of building a life where Tyler felt safe and protected, where his trauma could transform into strength, and where justice wasn't just an ideal, but a reality we'd fought for and won. The local news van was already parked outside Elena's house when we arrived, for what I thought would be a quiet few days of recovery. Tyler pressed his face against the car window, watching a reporter adjust her microphone while a cameraman checked his equipment. "Why are those people here, Mommy?" Tyler asked. his voice small with concern. I quickly reversed out of Elena's driveway and drove to a nearby coffee shop, my mind racing. Victoria's arrest had become public knowledge faster than I'd anticipated. As Oregon's Attorney General's wife, her booking on child abuse charges was exactly the kind of story that media outlets lived for. My phone buzzed with a call from Detective Kim. "Ms. Brennan, I wanted to give you a heads up. The arrest has hit the news, and there's considerable media interest in the case. I'd recommend avoiding your usual locations for a few days until things settle down. There are reporters at my son's grandmother's house right now." I'm not surprised. High-profile cases attract attention quickly. Is there somewhere else you can stay? Somewhere the media wouldn't think to look? I thought for a moment. My college roommate has a cabin outside Hood River. She's out of town for work this week. That sounds perfect. I'll need your location for security purposes, but we can keep you safe there while the initial media frenzy dies down. Within 2 hours, Tyler and I were driving east toward the Columbia River Gorge, our hastily packed bags in the back seat and a bag of groceries for our impromptu retreat. Tyler seemed to view it as an adventure, chattering about the possibility of seeing deer and maybe even a bear. The cabin was exactly what we needed, isolated, peaceful, and completely removed from the chaos erupting back in Portland. Tyler spent the afternoon exploring the property while I caught up on the news coverage of Victoria's arrest. The headlines were brutal. Attorney General's wife arrested for child abuse. Political power couple's dark secret exposed. Child welfare advocate's family faces abuse allegations. Every major news outlet in Oregon was covering the story, and several national publications had picked it up as well. The worst part was seeing my father's photo alongside Victoria's mugshot. The articles detailed his career prosecuting child abusers, the irony of his personal situation, and speculation about whether he'd known about Victoria's behavior. His office had released a brief statement. Attorney General Hayes has recused himself from any involvement in this matter and will not be commenting while the investigation is ongoing. I found myself feeling sorry for him, despite everything. My father had built his entire professional identity around protecting children, and now his personal life was proof that he'd failed at the most basic level. His marriage to Victoria had blinded him to the very signs he'd been trained to recognize professionally. That evening, while Tyler played with his Legos by the fireplace, I received an unexpected phone call from Marcus Chen, a criminal defense attorney I'd never met. "Ms. Brennan, I apologize for calling you directly, but I wanted to reach out before you were contacted by others. My name is Marcus Chen, and I represent victims in high-profile abuse cases. I believe you and your son may need legal representation. I thought the district attorney was handling the prosecution. They are, but you'll need someone to protect your interests specifically. Media attention can be overwhelming, and the defense will likely try to discredit both you and Tyler. You need an advocate who's working solely for your family." Marcus explained that Victoria's legal team would almost certainly attack Tyler's credibility, suggest that I had coached him to lie, and attempt to paint the incident as an accident blown out of proportion by an overprotective mother. Having experienced legal counsel would help me navigate both the criminal case and any civil litigation that might follow. "There's something else you should know," Marcus continued. Victoria's attorney has already filed a motion requesting that Tyler's interview recordings be sealed from public access. They're claiming that releasing them would traumatize the child and violate his privacy. Isn't that actually good for Tyler? In theory, yes. But in practice, it means they're planning to argue that Tyler's testimony is unreliable or coerced. They want to control the narrative before the public can hear his actual words. I agreed to meet with Marcus when we returned to Portland. The legal complexities were beyond my understanding, and Tyler deserved the best possible representation. The next morning brought a disturbing phone call from Elena. "Lily, dear. There are still reporters outside my house. But that's not why I'm calling. I had a visit yesterday from a woman claiming to be from Child Protective Services. She wanted to know about Tyler's behavior, whether you'd ever seemed unstable or vindictive." My blood ran cold. What did she look like? Blonde, well-dressed, very official-seeming. She had a badge and everything. But something felt off about her questions. She seemed more interested in finding problems with you than in Tyler's welfare. "Elena, CPS already interviewed Tyler officially. They wouldn't send someone to question family members without notifying me first. That's what I thought. I didn't tell her anything, of course, and I asked for her supervisor's contact information. She said she'd get back to me and left quickly. Someone was impersonating a CPS worker to gather information that could be used against me in court. The fake investigator was almost certainly working for Victoria's defense team, conducting unauthorized interviews to build a case against my credibility. I immediately called Detective Kim to report the incident. She was furious. This is illegal on multiple levels: impersonating a government official, witness tampering, and harassment of a victim's family. Can your mother-in-law provide a description of this woman? Former mother-in-law, but yes. Elena has an excellent memory for details. We'll add this to the charges against Mrs. Hayes' legal team if we can prove they're behind it. This kind of behavior suggests they're desperate, which usually means they know their client is guilty. That afternoon, Tyler and I walked along the sandy river, watching him skip stones with his uninjured hand. His burned palm was healing well, though the scar was becoming more pronounced. Dr. Morrison had warned that it would be permanent, a lasting reminder of Victoria's cruelty. "Mommy, will people ask me about my hand when I go back to school?" Tyler was supposed to start second grade in 3 weeks, and I hadn't yet figured out how to handle the attention his case was receiving. His school would need to be briefed about the situation to protect his privacy and safety. Some people might ask, but you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. You can just say you were hurt, and you're better now. What if they know about Victoria being arrested? The question showed how much Tyler understood about the situation despite his young age. Children are remarkably perceptive about adult drama, even when we try to shield them from it. If someone asks about that, you can tell them that grown-ups handled it and you're safe now. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. Will Victoria ever get out of jail? I don't know yet, buddy. That's for judges and juries to decide. But even if she does get out someday, she won't be allowed to be around children anymore. Good. She shouldn't be around kids if she hurts them. His matter-of-fact wisdom never failed to amaze me. Tyler had processed his trauma with remarkable resilience, understanding both that what happened to him was wrong and that he deserved protection. That evening, while Tyler slept, I spent hours researching everything I could find about Victoria's background. If her defense team was conducting unauthorized investigations into my life, I needed to understand what they might be hiding about hers. What I discovered was disturbing. Victoria Hayes had been married twice before meeting my father. Her first marriage ended after 18 months, with no public explanation. Her second marriage lasted 3 years and ended in a bitter divorce where her ex-husband had sought a restraining order. The details were sealed, but the fact that legal protection had been necessary suggested a pattern of problematic behavior. I also found records of several complaints filed against Victoria during her time as a volunteer at various children's charities. The complaints were vague: inappropriate interactions with young participants, and concerning behavior toward program beneficiaries. But they painted a picture of someone who had difficulties with appropriate boundaries around children. Most significantly, I discovered that Victoria had been quietly removed from her volunteer position at a local children's hospital 6 months before she met my father. The hospital's public records showed only that her volunteer service had been, quote, discontinued, but former colleagues might have more detailed information about why. Marcus Chen agreed to have his investigator look into Victoria's history more thoroughly. If there was a pattern of abuse or inappropriate behavior with children, it would be crucial evidence for Tyler's case. The third day at the cabin brought news that changed everything. Detective Kim called with an update that left me speechless. Ms. Brennan, we've had a significant development. Another victim has come forward. My hands trembled as I processed this information. Another child? A 12-year-old boy named Alex Martinez. His mother saw the news coverage and realized that what happened to her son last year might not have been an accident after all. Detective Kim explained that Alex had been a participant in a summer program that Victoria had volunteered with. During an outdoor cooking activity, Alex had suffered severe burns on his forearm. Victoria had been supervising the group and claimed that Alex had accidentally touched a hot grill grate while not paying attention. Alex told his mother at the time that the volunteer lady had grabbed his arm and pressed it against the grill when he asked for extra food. His mother thought he was exaggerating because he was embarrassed about getting hurt. But after seeing Tyler's story on the news, she realized her son might have been telling the truth. Is Alex willing to testify? His mother is bringing him in for an interview tomorrow. If his story is credible and matches the pattern we're seeing, this case becomes much stronger. Multiple victims with similar injuries and consistent stories make it much harder for the defense to claim these were accidents or false allegations. After I hung up, I sat on the cabin's deck and tried to process what this meant. Tyler wasn't Victoria's only victim. There was another child who had suffered at her hands, another family that had been dismissed and disbelieved. The scope of Victoria's cruelty was larger than anyone had imagined. I called Tyler's therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, to discuss how to handle this new information. Tyler had started seeing Dr. Walsh immediately after the incident, and she'd been helping him process his trauma in age-appropriate ways. Lily, this is actually positive news for Tyler's healing process, Dr. Walsh explained. Knowing that another child experienced similar abuse confirms that Tyler's memories are accurate and that he's not alone in his experience. It can help reduce any guilt or self-blame he might be carrying. Should I tell him about Alex? Let me talk with Tyler first and see how he's processing his own experience. If he's ready to hear that he helped protect another child by speaking up, it could be empowering for him. But if he's still struggling with his own trauma, it might be too much right now. That night, I video called Elena to check on how she was handling the media attention. She looked tired but determined, her gray hair pinned back in its usual neat bun. The reporters have mostly moved on to other locations, she reported. But I've had several calls from people claiming to be friends of Victoria's, asking questions about Tyler and your family. I haven't told them anything, of course. What kind of questions? Whether Tyler has behavioral problems, whether you're a stable parent, whether there have been any previous incidents or complaints. They're definitely fishing for information to use against you. This confirmed my suspicion that Victoria's defense team was conducting their own investigation, trying to find anything they could use to discredit Tyler's testimony or my credibility as a parent. The fact that they were resorting to unauthorized interviews and impersonation suggested they weren't finding the ammunition they needed through legitimate channels. The next morning brought a call from Marcus Chen with updates on the legal proceedings. Lily, I have several pieces of news. First, the good news. The district attorney has decided to upgrade the charges against Victoria to aggravated assault and first-degree abuse charges based on the new victim coming forward. These are felony charges that carry significant prison time. What's the bad news? Victoria's defense team has filed a motion to have Tyler's case separated from Alex Martinez's case. They're arguing that combining the cases would be prejudicial and that the similarities between the incidents are coincidental. They want each case tried separately. Marcus explained that this was a common defense strategy in cases involving multiple victims. By separating the cases, Victoria's lawyers could argue that each incident was an isolated accident rather than part of a pattern of abusive behavior. However, the prosecutor is fighting the motion. Pattern evidence is powerful, and Judge Williams tends to allow it when it's relevant to establishing intent and modus operandi. The legal maneuvering was complex, but the essential point was clear. Victoria's defense team was working hard to prevent the jury from hearing about multiple victims. They knew that pattern evidence would be devastating to their case. That afternoon, Tyler and I had a long conversation about the upcoming court proceedings. Dr. Walsh had helped me prepare for this discussion, giving me tools to explain the legal process in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Tyler, you know how you told the nice lady your story about what Victoria did to your hand? Yes, Sarah was really nice. She believed me. Well, pretty soon you might need to tell your story to some other people, a judge, and maybe some people called a jury. It's their job to decide what happens to people who hurt children. Tyler considered this seriously. Will Victoria be there? She might be, but she won't be able to hurt you or even talk to you. There will be lots of adults there to keep you safe. Will you be there too? I'll be right there with you the whole time, buddy. You won't be alone for even 1 minute. Tyler nodded, then asked, if I tell them what really happened, will Victoria have to say she's sorry? The question broke my heart. Despite everything Victoria had done to him, Tyler still held on to the childhood belief that adults should apologize when they do wrong. He couldn't understand that some people never feel remorse for their actions. She might not say she's sorry, Tyler. Some grown-ups have trouble admitting when they've done something wrong. But the important thing is that other people will know the truth, and they'll make sure she can't hurt any more children. Okay? I can tell them what happened. It's the truth. His simple determination to tell the truth, despite the complexity and media attention surrounding his case, reminded me why we were fighting this battle. Tyler deserved justice, and other children deserved protection from Victoria's cruelty. The final day at the cabin was peaceful, giving Tyler and me time to simply be together without the pressure of court dates and media coverage. We hiked along the river, collected interesting rocks, and read books by the fireplace. Tyler's hand was healing beautifully, and his spirits seemed higher than they'd been since the incident. As we packed to return to Portland, Tyler looked around the cabin with satisfaction. "This was a good place to hide, Mommy." "We weren't really hiding, buddy. We were just taking a break while grown-ups handled some important things. It felt like hiding, but the good kind. Like when we're safe and cozy inside when it's raining." His analogy was perfect. We had found shelter from the storm of media attention and legal proceedings. But now it was time to face the world again. Tyler was stronger, I was better prepared, and we had an excellent legal team supporting us. The drive back to Portland felt like returning to battle, but I was ready. Victoria was in custody, facing serious charges. A second victim had come forward to support Tyler's case. The legal system was working as it should to protect children and prosecute abusers. Most importantly, Tyler knew he was believed, supported, and safe. Whatever challenges lay ahead in the courtroom, we would face them together, armed with the truth and the unshakable knowledge that we were fighting for justice. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain to climb as Tyler and I approached the imposing granite building on the morning of the preliminary hearing. Media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray October sky like metal flowers seeking light. Tyler's small hand gripped mine tightly, his other hand absently touching the fading scar on his palm through his jacket pocket. "Remember what we practiced," I whispered as we walked past the reporters who shouted questions we'd been instructed to ignore. "You just tell the truth, and I'll be right there with you." Marcus Chen met us at the security entrance, his presence reassuring in his crisp navy suit and confident demeanor. "The prosecution feels very good about today," he told me quietly as we passed through the metal detectors. Alex Martinez's testimony yesterday was powerful, and the medical evidence is irrefutable. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Tyler sat between Marcus and me in the front row, his legs swinging nervously as he took in the formal surroundings. Across the aisle, Victoria sat with her defense team, her blonde hair pulled back severely and her expression carefully neutral. She wore a conservative gray dress that made her look like someone's beloved grandmother, rather than a woman facing felony child abuse charges. When she glanced in our direction, Tyler instinctively moved closer to me. "She looks different," he observed quietly. "People sometimes try to look different in court," I explained. "But it doesn't change what they did." Judge Patricia Williams entered with a rustling of robes and the sharp bang of her gavel. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I'd researched her background extensively and learned that she had a reputation for being tough on child abuse cases, having started her career as a prosecutor in the domestic violence unit. "We're here today for the preliminary hearing in the case of State of Oregon versus Victoria Lynn Hayes," Judge Williams announced. "The defendant is charged with aggravated assault in the first degree and criminal abuse in the first degree. Counselors, are you ready to proceed?" District Attorney Sarah Martinez rose from the prosecution table. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with dark hair and an intensity that reminded me of a focused predator. "Yes, Your Honor. The state is ready." Victoria's lead defense attorney, a distinguished man named Robert Thornfield, who wore expensive suits and had a reputation for defending wealthy clients, stood as well. The defense is ready, Your Honor. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the next 2 hours. Dr. Morrison testified about Tyler's injuries, presenting enlarged photographs of the burn patterns that made several jurors wince visibly. She explained in clinical detail how the uniform nature of the burn indicated sustained contact with the heating element, not the brief touch that would result from an accidental encounter. In your professional opinion, Dr. Morrison, could this injury have been caused accidentally? DA Martinez asked. No, absolutely not. The pattern, depth, and uniformity of the burn indicate that the child's hand was held in place against the heat source for several seconds. An accidental touch would produce a very different injury pattern. Thornfield's cross-examination was aggressive but respectful, focusing on the possibility that Tyler might have been reaching for food on the stove and gotten his hand stuck momentarily. Dr. Morrison remained unshakable in her testimony, calmly explaining why his theory was medically impossible given the evidence. Detective Kim testified next, walking the court through her investigation. She described the consistency of Tyler's statements across multiple interviews, the physical evidence collected from the scene, and the lack of any credible accident scenario that matched the injury pattern. Detective Kim, did you investigate the defendant's background for similar incidents? DA Martinez asked. Yes, we did. We discovered that Mrs. Hayes had been removed from volunteer positions at 2 different children's organizations following complaints about inappropriate behavior with minors. Thornfield objected vigorously to this line of testimony, arguing that past complaints that hadn't resulted in charges were irrelevant and prejudicial. Judge Williams sustained some objections, but allowed testimony about the pattern of Victoria being quietly removed from positions involving children. When it came time for Tyler to testify, the courtroom fell completely silent. Child testimony in criminal cases required special procedures, and Judge Williams had ordered that Tyler be questioned in her chambers with only essential personnel present. The session would be recorded and played for the courtroom. I accompanied Tyler to the judge's chambers, a wood-paneled room lined with law books and dominated by a massive desk. Judge Williams removed her robe and spoke to Tyler in a gentle voice that contrasted sharply with her courtroom demeanor. Tyler, my name is Judge Williams, and my job is to make sure people tell the truth in court. Do you know the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie? Tyler nodded seriously. The truth is what really happened. A lie is when you say something that's not real. That's exactly right. Now I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened to your hand. You just tell me what really happened, okay? Tyler's testimony was heartbreaking in its simplicity and devastating in its clarity. He described eating breakfast at his grandfather's house, Victoria calling him over to the stove, and the deliberate way she pressed his hand against the burner, despite his screams and attempts to pull away. Tyler, are you sure Victoria held your hand on the stove on purpose? Judge Williams asked gently. Yes. I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than me. She held it there until I was crying really loud, and then she let go and told me I should have minded my own business. Did you do something to make Victoria angry before this happened? Tyler thought carefully before answering. I don't think so. I was just eating my cereal. But she was already mad when she woke up. She was talking about my mom and saying mean things. When Judge Williams asked Tyler to demonstrate what happened using a toy stove, his recreation was chillingly precise. He showed exactly how Victoria had gripped his wrist and forced his palm down against the burner, holding it there despite his struggles. Back in the courtroom, the recording of Tyler's testimony played on large screens. The silence was profound as Tyler's young voice filled the room, describing his ordeal with matter-of-fact courage. Several jurors wiped their eyes, and I noticed one of Victoria's own attorneys looking uncomfortable as Tyler's words painted an unmistakable picture of deliberate abuse. Thornfield's cross-examination of Tyler was careful and restrained, clearly aware that aggressive questioning of a 7-year-old would backfire spectacularly. He focused on suggesting that Tyler might be confused about the sequence of events or influenced by adult conversations about the incident. Tyler, have you talked to your mom about what happened that morning? Yes, she asked me what happened and I told her. Did your mom ever tell you what she thought happened? She said that what Victoria did was wrong, and that it wasn't my fault. Did anyone ever tell you that you should say Victoria hurt you on purpose? Tyler looked puzzled by the question. Nobody told me to say anything. I just told them what really happened. Thornfield's efforts to shake Tyler's testimony failed completely. The boy's account remained consistent and credible, delivered with the kind of straightforward honesty that only children possess. The prosecution's final witness was Alex Martinez, the 12-year-old boy who had suffered similar burns at Victoria's hands during a summer program. Alex was older and more articulate than Tyler, and his testimony provided crucial pattern evidence. Alex described how Victoria had become angry when he asked for a second hot dog during an outdoor barbecue. She had grabbed his arm and pressed it against the hot grill grate, telling him that greedy children needed to learn patience. Like Tyler, Alex had initially been disbelieved when he told adults what really happened. I thought maybe I was remembering it wrong. Alex testified. The other grown-ups said it was an accident, so I started thinking maybe I just got confused. But when I saw the news about what happened to Tyler, I knew I wasn't confused. She did the same thing to both of us. The defense case was brief and unconvincing. Thornfield called character witnesses who testified to Victoria's reputation as a charitable volunteer and devoted wife. They described her work with various children's organizations and her apparent dedication to helping young people. Under cross-examination, however, DA Martinez revealed that most of these witnesses had only superficial knowledge of Victoria's actual interactions with children. They knew her public persona but had never observed her behavior when she thought no one was watching. Victoria herself chose not to testify, a decision that Thornfield explained was her constitutional right, but that clearly disappointed some jurors who wanted to hear her side of the story. During closing arguments, DA Martinez methodically dismantled any possibility that Tyler's and Alex's injuries were accidental. She presented a timeline showing Victoria's escalating pattern of inappropriate behavior with children, her removal from volunteer positions, and the deliberate nature of both attacks. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have two children ages 7 and 12 who suffered nearly identical injuries at the hands of the defendant. Both children immediately reported that Victoria Hayes deliberately burned them. Both children's accounts have remained consistent through multiple interviews. The medical evidence supports their testimony completely. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. The defense wants you to believe that these are coincidences, that two different children happen to get burned in exactly the same way, happen to make up exactly the same story about how it occurred, and happen to be wrong about Victoria Hayes' intentions. That requires you to ignore evidence, disbelieve children, and accept an implausible series of accidents. The evidence shows that Victoria Hayes is a child abuser who targeted vulnerable children when she thought no one would believe them. She was wrong. We believe them. Tyler Brennan and Alex Martinez deserve justice. Thornfield's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt and the possibility of misunderstanding. He portrayed Victoria as a well-meaning woman whose attempts to teach children about safety had been tragically misinterpreted. Victoria Hayes has devoted her life to helping children, he argued. She has volunteered countless hours, donated thousands of dollars, and opened her home to young people in need. Does this sound like someone who would deliberately harm a child? He suggested that both children had exaggerated their accounts, influenced by adult reactions and media attention. Children's memories are unreliable, especially when they're in pain or scared. Tyler Brennan and Alex Martinez experienced traumatic accidents, and in their fear and confusion, they created a narrative that made sense to them. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours. Tyler and I waited in a small conference room with Marcus, playing card games and trying to distract ourselves from the weight of the decision being made down the hall. Tyler seemed remarkably calm, coloring pictures and asking occasional questions about what would happen next. "Will I have to come back to court again?" he asked. "Maybe, if there's a trial," I explained. "But you've already done the hardest part. You told the truth, and now other people get to decide what to do about it." When the jury returned, their expressions were solemn but determined. Judge Williams called the courtroom to order, and the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly, her hand gripping the defense table. On the charge of criminal abuse in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps. Victoria turned pale, her carefully maintained dignity finally showing cracks. Thornfield immediately requested bail pending sentencing, but D.A. Martinez argued successfully that Victoria represented a flight risk given her previous attempt to leave the country. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later and remanded Victoria to custody immediately. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Victoria finally looked directly at Tyler and me. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw pure rage in her eyes, not remorse, not shame, but fury that she'd been caught and held accountable. Tyler watched the proceedings with wide eyes, but showed no fear. "She looks really angry," he observed quietly. "Some people get angry when they have to face consequences for their actions," I explained. "But that's not your problem anymore." Outside the courthouse, D.A. Martinez spoke to the media while Tyler and I slipped out a side entrance. The verdict was major news, particularly given my father's position and Victoria's previous reputation. Headlines across Oregon proclaimed, "Attorney General's wife convicted of child abuse," and "Political power couples fall from grace." That evening, Tyler and I had a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us processing the day's events. Tyler seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been lifted. "Mommy, does this mean Victoria can't hurt other kids now?" "That's exactly what it means, buddy. She's going to prison, and when she gets out, she won't be allowed around children anymore." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Good." Alex and I stopped her. His simple statement captured something profound. Two brave children had spoken the truth despite being initially disbelieved, and their courage had prevented Victoria from victimizing other kids. They had transformed their trauma into protection for others. My father called that evening his first contact since Victoria's arrest weeks earlier. His voice was heavy with exhaustion, and something that might have been shame. "Lily, I owe you and Tyler an apology that I can never fully express. I was so wrong about Victoria, and my failure to listen to Tyler put him in danger. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that." "Dad, Tyler is safe now. That's what matters. I know you probably can't forgive me right away, but I hope someday you might consider letting me be part of Tyler's life again. He's my grandson, and I love him more than I've ever been able to show." The conversation was the beginning of a long healing process. My father's political career was effectively over, but perhaps losing his position would help him find his way back to being the grandfather Tyler deserved. As I tucked Tyler into bed that night, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" "We're going to be better than okay, sweetheart. We're going to be strong and safe and happy." Tyler smiled and settled into his pillow, his scarred hand resting peacefully on his blanket. The physical mark would always remain, but the fear and trauma were already beginning to fade. Victoria Hayes had been brought to justice, and 2 children had learned that their voices mattered, that adults would listen when they spoke the truth, and that they had the power to protect themselves and others. Justice had prevailed, but more importantly, Tyler had discovered his own strength. The little boy who had suffered in silence for fear of not being believed had become a courageous advocate for his own safety and that of other children. He had faced his abuser in court and emerged victorious, forever changed but not forever damaged. Tomorrow would bring sentencing and the final chapter of Victoria's accountability. But tonight, Tyler slept peacefully, knowing he was safe, believed, and loved. 6 months after Victoria's sentencing to 12 years in state prison, Tyler and I stood in the warm spring sunshine outside the newly opened Children's Advocacy Center in downtown Portland. The building had been renovated from an old community center, its bright yellow exterior and colorful playground equipment, a stark contrast to the sterile courthouse where we'd spent so many difficult days. Tyler wore his favorite superhero t-shirt and carried a small wooden sign he'd painted himself. In careful block letters it read, "Tyler's Safe Space, where kids are believed." His scarred palm, now barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it, gripped the sign proudly as photographers from local news outlets captured the moment. "Are you ready for this, buddy?" I asked, adjusting his collar and smoothing his hair. "I'm ready, Mommy. This is important work." At 8 years old, Tyler had developed a vocabulary and perspective that sometimes startled adults. Words like advocacy and trauma-informed care rolled off his tongue as naturally as requests for chocolate milk. He understood that his experience, painful as it had been, could help other children find their voices and receive the protection they deserved. The Advocacy Center was the culmination of a year-long project that had grown organically from Tyler's case. The media attention surrounding Victoria's trial had sparked conversations throughout Oregon about child protection services, the challenges children faced when reporting abuse, and the need for specialized facilities where young victims could feel safe telling their stories. Tyler had become an unexpected spokesperson for the cause, though always with careful limits to protect his privacy and emotional well-being. His therapist, Dr. Walsh, had worked closely with child advocacy experts to ensure that Tyler's involvement was therapeutic rather than re-traumatizing. Tyler helped us understand what children need when they're scared and hurt, explained Dr. Rachel Morrison, the center's director, as she introduced Tyler to the small crowd gathered for the opening ceremony. His courage in speaking the truth showed us that children will share their experiences when they feel safe, believed, and supported. The center featured specially designed interview rooms that looked like comfortable living spaces rather than institutional offices. There were therapy rooms equipped with art supplies and play therapy materials, a small library filled with books about resilience and healing, and a garden where children could spend quiet time outdoors while processing their experiences. Tyler cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, his grin visible from across the courtyard. The applause was warm and genuine, coming from child welfare workers, law enforcement officers, medical professionals, and families who had been touched by abuse and trauma. Among the crowd, I spotted familiar faces from our journey. Detective Kim stood near the back, her usual serious expression softened by a rare smile. Dr. Morrison from the hospital had brought several colleagues from the pediatric unit. Marcus Chen was there with his wife and teenage daughter, all of them beaming with pride. Most surprisingly, my father appeared near the edge of the gathering. David Hayes looked older than his 62 years, his hair now completely gray and his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there 2 years ago. He caught my eye and nodded respectfully, making no move to approach Tyler or me directly. Since Victoria's conviction, my father had undergone his own transformation. He'd resigned from his position as Attorney General, citing personal reasons and a need to step back from public service. The resignation had been widely interpreted as taking responsibility for his failure to protect his own grandson, though he'd never spoken publicly about the specifics. During the past year, my father had attended every single therapy session that Dr. Walsh recommended for family healing, even when Tyler wasn't ready to see him. He'd undergone his own counseling to understand how he'd failed to recognize the signs of abuse in his own home and how his political ambitions had blinded him to his family's needs. The reconciliation between Tyler and his grandfather had been slow and carefully managed. It began with letters that my father wrote to Tyler, not asking for forgiveness but expressing his love and regret. Tyler had dictated responses, usually consisting of drawings and simple messages about his school activities or favorite books. Their first in-person meeting in 8 months had taken place at the Advocacy Center during its construction. Tyler had insisted on showing his grandfather around the building, explaining each room's purpose with the confidence of a child who'd been deeply involved in the planning process. "This is where kids talk to nice people about bad things that happened to them," Tyler had explained, leading his grandfather through the interview rooms. "The grown-ups here always believe children, even when other grown-ups don't." My father had listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and allowing Tyler to guide the conversation. There had been no dramatic reconciliation scene, no tearful apologies that would have been inappropriate for a child to bear. Instead, there had been the quiet beginning of rebuilding trust through consistent, respectful interaction. After the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Tyler and I mingled with the crowd, accepting congratulations and hearing stories from other families who had been inspired by Tyler's courage. A mother named Patricia approached us, her 10-year-old daughter hiding shyly behind her. "Tyler, I wanted to thank you," Patricia said, kneeling to Tyler's level. When my daughter saw you on the news talking about how important it is to tell the truth, she found the courage to tell me about her uncle. She's getting help now because you showed her that children should be believed." Tyler listened seriously, then extended his hand to shake Patricia's daughter's hand. "I'm glad you told your mom," he said simply. "That was really brave." These interactions had become commonplace in Tyler's life. Parents, teachers, and child welfare workers regularly shared stories about how Tyler's case had opened conversations about child safety and created opportunities for other children to disclose abuse. Tyler, the irony was devastating. The man who prosecuted child abusers for a living had married one and was now protecting her instead of his own grandson. "Detective Kim, what about my father? He's been defending Victoria and pressuring me to drop this. That's unfortunately common in family abuse cases. Sometimes family members have difficulty accepting that someone they trust could harm a child. However, if your father attempts to interfere with this investigation or intimidate witnesses, he could face charges himself." That afternoon, I picked Tyler up from his grandmother's house where he'd been staying during my interview with police. My ex-husband's mother, Elena Brennan, had been a godsend throughout this crisis, providing Tyler with stability and love while I navigated the legal system. "How did it go today?" Elena asked, her weathered hands gentle as she helped Tyler with his backpack. "Tyler did great. He told the truth, and the police believe him." Elena nodded approvingly. She'd been skeptical of Victoria from the beginning, noting how the woman seemed to compete with me for Tyler's attention rather than supporting our relationship. "That woman never sat right with me," Elena said quietly. "Too much concern with appearances, not enough with actual caring. I'm proud of you for protecting Tyler, even when it's difficult." That evening, Tyler and I had dinner at our kitchen table, and he seemed more relaxed than he'd been since the incident. His hand was healing well, and the stress of uncertainty was lifting now that adults were taking his story seriously. "Mommy, will I have to tell my story again?" "Maybe, if we go to court." "But you've done the hardest part already. You told the truth, and people believed you." Tyler nodded. "The lady today was nice. She said I was very brave." "You are brave, Tyler. Braver than most adults I know." My phone remained mercifully quiet that evening, no threatening texts or angry calls from my father. The calm felt ominous, like the quiet before a storm. Victoria and my father were undoubtedly strategizing, planning their response to the criminal investigation. I spent the evening researching Oregon's victim protection laws and documenting every interaction I'd had with Victoria and my father since the incident. If this case went to trial, I wanted to be prepared for every question, every attack on Tyler's credibility, every attempt to blame me for the situation. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Detective Kim called while Tyler was eating breakfast, her voice tense with urgency. "Ms. Brennan, we need to move quickly. Victoria Hayes attempted to leave the state last night. She was stopped at Portland International Airport with a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. We're executing the arrest warrant immediately." My hands shook as I absorbed this information. Victoria had tried to flee the country rather than face the consequences of abusing Tyler. Her attempted escape was essentially an admission of guilt, proof that she knew exactly what she'd done. What does this mean for the case? It strengthens our position considerably. Flight risk demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The judge will likely deny bail, which means Mrs. Hayes will remain in custody until trial. After I hung up, I looked across the table at Tyler, who was carefully cutting his pancakes with his uninjured hand. He had no idea that his abuser was being arrested at that very moment, that justice was finally beginning to work in his favor. "Tyler, how would you feel about visiting Grandma Elena for a few days? We might need to stay somewhere safe while some grown-up things get sorted out." "Will Victoria be there?" "No, sweetheart. Victoria won't be able to hurt you anymore." Tyler considered this, then nodded. "Can I bring my Legos?" "You can bring whatever you want." As I packed our bags, I thought about the journey we'd traveled in just 1 week. From a trusted family member to an abuser in custody. From a child's accident to a criminal case. From my father's disappointment to my own fierce determination to protect my son. Victoria's arrest would trigger a media firestorm. My father's political career would face scrutiny. Our family would be forever changed. But Tyler would be safe, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. The phone rang as I zipped up Tyler's suitcase. My father's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since this began, I answered. Lily. His voice was strained, aged. I just heard about Victoria's arrest. Good. Maybe now you'll listen to your grandson instead of protecting his abuser. A long pause. I need to see Tyler. To apologize. Dad, Tyler is safe and happy for the first time in a week. I'm not going to disrupt that so you can ease your conscience. I was wrong, he said quietly. I should have listened to you. I should have protected him. Yes, you should have. But you chose Victoria instead, and now she's in jail where she belongs. The conversation ended there. There would be time later for forgiveness, for rebuilding our relationship, for healing the damage Victoria had caused to our entire family. But first, Tyler needed to feel completely secure, and I needed to see this case through to its conclusion. As we drove to Elena's house, Tyler hummed quietly in the back seat, his injured hand resting comfortably in his lap. He was resilient in the way children often are, adapting to new circumstances with remarkable grace. The physical scar would remain, but I was determined that the emotional wounds would heal completely. Victoria Hayes was in custody, facing serious criminal charges. The truth had prevailed, despite my father's political influence and Victoria's social connections. Tyler's voice had been heard, believed, and acted upon. The hardest part was over. Now came the work of moving forward, of building a life where Tyler felt safe and protected, where his trauma could transform into strength, and where justice wasn't just an ideal, but a reality we'd fought for and won. The local news van was already parked outside Elena's house when we arrived, for what I thought would be a quiet few days of recovery. Tyler pressed his face against the car window, watching a reporter adjust her microphone while a cameraman checked his equipment. "Why are those people here, Mommy?" Tyler asked, his voice small with concern. I quickly reversed out of Elena's driveway and drove to a nearby coffee shop, my mind racing. Victoria's arrest had become public knowledge faster than I'd anticipated. As Oregon's Attorney General's wife, her booking on child abuse charges was exactly the kind of story that media outlets lived for. My phone buzzed with a call from Detective Kim. "Ms. Brennan, I wanted to give you a heads up. The arrest has hit the news, and there's considerable media interest in the case. I'd recommend avoiding your usual locations for a few days until things settle down. There are reporters at my son's grandmother's house right now." I'm not surprised. High-profile cases attract attention quickly. Is there somewhere else you can stay? Somewhere the media wouldn't think to look? I thought for a moment. My college roommate has a cabin outside Hood River. She's out of town for work this week. That sounds perfect. I'll need your location for security purposes, but we can keep you safe there while the initial media frenzy dies down. Within 2 hours, Tyler and I were driving east toward the Columbia River Gorge, our hastily packed bags in the back seat and a bag of groceries for our impromptu retreat. Tyler seemed to view it as an adventure, chattering about the possibility of seeing deer and maybe even a bear. The cabin was exactly what we needed. Isolated, peaceful, and completely removed from the chaos erupting back in Portland. Tyler spent the afternoon exploring the property while I caught up on the news coverage of Victoria's arrest. The headlines were brutal. Attorney General's wife arrested for child abuse. Political power couple's dark secret exposed. Child welfare advocate's family faces abuse allegations. Every major news outlet in Oregon was covering the story, and several national publications had picked it up as well. The worst part was seeing my father's photo alongside Victoria's mugshot. The articles detailed his career prosecuting child abusers, the irony of his personal situation, and speculation about whether he'd known about Victoria's behavior. His office had released a brief statement. Attorney General Hayes has recused himself from any involvement in this matter and will not be commenting while the investigation is ongoing. I found myself feeling sorry for him, despite everything. My father had built his entire professional identity around protecting children, and now his personal life was proof that he'd failed at the most basic level. 2 years ago, Tyler had been a frightened child whose trust in adults had been shattered by deliberate cruelty. Tonight, he was a confident, empathetic boy who understood his own power to create positive change in the world. Victoria Hayes was serving a 12-year prison sentence, her reputation destroyed, and her access to children permanently restricted. My father was slowly rebuilding his relationship with Tyler through consistent, respectful interaction and a genuine commitment to understanding child welfare. The legal system had worked as it should, protecting the vulnerable and holding abusers accountable. Most importantly, Tyler had learned that his voice mattered, that truth was more powerful than manipulation, and that he had the strength to protect himself and others. The child who had once cowered in fear now stood confidently before crowds, sharing his story to help other children find their own courage. Justice had been served, but the real victory was in Tyler's transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. He'd taken the worst experience of his young life and turned it into a force for protecting other children. Victoria had tried to break him, but instead, she'd forged him into someone stronger and more compassionate than he might otherwise have become. The scar on Tyler's palm would fade with time, but the lessons he'd learned about truth, courage, and the power of speaking up would last forever. He'd discovered that even the smallest voices can create enormous change when they refuse to be silenced. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, Tyler slept peacefully, surrounded by the love and protection he deserved. He was safe, he was believed, and he was making the world a little bit safer for other children. That was more than justice, that was transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.